Welcome. I'm Sebastian Mahfood, and you're listening to WCAT Radio, the on-air wing of En Route Books and Media, bringing you the dulcet sounds of Catholic wisdom.
Welcome to The Open Door, a show based on the words in Revelation, "I have left an open door before you, which no one can close." This is WCAT Radio's longest-running show, which opened the door to the radio station in October 2016. It's currently offered by Jim Hanink, Mario Ramos Reyes and friends, and remains open to the love of God in its call to build a culture of life and a just social order through the panel's discussion of the Catholic social teaching principles of solidarity, subsidiarity, and economic democracy. The Open Door also explores nonviolence, distributism, and communitarianism. So join us at The Open Door, where you too can be part of the conversation.
Welcome to The Open Door. Jim Hanink here with fellow panelists Mario Ramos Reyes and Christopher Zander. Our special guest is Mr. Chris Arnade, the author of Dignity, Seeking Respect in Back Row America. As always, we'll begin with prayer. Come, Holy Spirit, fill the hearts of your faithful, and kindle in them the fire of your love. Send forth your Spirit, and they shall be created, and you will renew the face of the earth. Lord, by the light of the Holy Spirit, you have taught the hearts of your faithful. In the same Spirit, help us to relish what is right and always rejoice in your consolation. We ask this through Christ our Lord. Amen. Chris Arnade, would it be right to say that your book, Dignity, Seeking Respect in Back Row America, is about accompanying, that's a theme of Pope Francis, accompanying those that have been left behind and listening to them?
Yes. Well, first of all, thank you for having me on your show. I think that's a very flattering summary of my book, and it certainly is what I tried to do. For those who don't know the exact details, I spent roughly 7 years with what I call Back Row America, which is communities and people in those communities who've been left behind, ignored, forgotten. This includes prostitutes, it includes homeless addicts, it includes retirees, it includes people who live under bridges and in abandoned homes, and all across America. So it was originally a project that started in the Bronx, in the poorest neighborhood in the Bronx, Hunts Point. Actually, part of the reason I had gone to Hunts Point is because there's a monastery there, Corpus Christi Monastery, that I went to see, and other than that, the neighborhood is filled with. It has been long stigmatized as in a lot of things that New York doesn't want is put there, and it has a large population of homeless and drug users. And I spent 4 years documenting, trying to tell their stories. They don't have a platform to tell their own stories, so I tried to be a conduit for that. And then I did the same thing all across America. Put roughly 400,000 miles in my car, driving all around the United States, visiting similar stigmatized communities, both rural, urban, red state, blue state, everywhere.
That's a lot of traveling. Now, I'm going to ask Mario to bring us ahead a little bit to a community center that you found wherever you went.
Well, Welcome, Chris, to our program. I read with really with a lot of interest and passion. Your book was brought by my wife, who saw the encounter you have in New York in January, and I was really struck by the book. Because in many ways, this perspective you are giving about this economy built for that we build for these people is somehow I was relating to that because I am working with people who are disadvantaged in an urban area. But what struck me most is that you always mention, or very often you mention, that there is a place where people discuss their issues, spend time, and this is the place is MacDonald. So how is it that MacDonald's played so great role in your travels and in with these people?
Because I was, to put very bluntly, it's often one of the few places that it's functional in these communities and is welcoming for these people without judgment. I found myself in McDonald's a lot because this is where the people I was trying to listen to and learn from and tell their stories were. McDonald's doesn't kick people out usually, and so if you're living on the margins, if you're living rough, if you're homeless, McDonald's is a place you can go to get inexpensive food and sit for 6 or 7 hours and regain some dignity because you're treated no different than anybody else in McDonald's. You're allowed to integrate into the community without being, stigmatized and regaining a sense of normalcy that is often denied to you. McDonald's has a lot of things that make them effectively, for many communities, what I call ad hoc community centers. They have bathrooms, they have inexpensive food, they have pretty good coffee, by the way. They have free Wi-Fi and a place to charge your phone or your laptop or your devices that you need to charge and escape the weather. But more than that, what I found as I started spending more and more time at McDonald's is they have community. Functionally, they operate effectively as the new town center for many of these depressed neighborhoods, and that's true. Wherever you go, if you're in a new place and you walk into the McDonald's on usually on a morning at 7 a.m, you'll find some tables of what is effectively regulars who get together every day and have been getting together every day for 20 to 30 years. And it can be a very diverse group, one of the few places in many communities where people along class and race and religion all intermingle. In addition, it's also a place where you find a lot of people reading the Bible, a lot of people doing church groups, a lot of Bible study groups. It's just really a vibrant little community within these communities that have lost a lot of their vibrancy.
If I can interject something here, you said something. You said these people are looking down by others. There is a stigma attached to them, and that you think this view is something common to the American culture, where we see dignity attached only to those who are the winners and not the losers. And so how do you see that? Mm-hmm.
I think that's very much the case, and perhaps we can get into it in later questions. But the idea that I think one of the themes in my book, I think, is that the culture, the society, the policymakers, the front row. I call the people who run things the front row because they all have similar educational backgrounds. The secular elite, if you will, really have only one axis of valid meaning, and that's the material. It's building a resume to get an education, to get a good job and then make a lot of money. And all these other forms of meaning, like place and faith, are kind of devalued and looked down on. So if you don't have a lot of money, if you don't have a big resume, if you are considered, society considers you a loser. One of the flip sides of our meritocracy is there's this idea that everybody should want to be highly educated and have this one path, getting this large resume to go to Harvard, to go to then live in Washington, D.C., and then do whatever. If you don't value that way of life, then you're considered a loser. It's your fault. Somehow you didn't succeed. And I think there's this real sense of stigma and humiliation that is out there for those who haven't left their home, gone off, got a college degree, and then became part of the global elite. There's a sense that they failed, and that the people at the top view them as having failed. So there's, it can come from a very deep place, the stigma, but it also in smaller things. One of the things that I try to illustrate in the book is how different, these government institutions that serve the poor are, how little soul they have, and how cold they can feel. And with all their bureaucratic rules and their harsh lighting and linoleum floors, it can make people feel at every level like they're just a lab rat who are being treated badly by society, and that just adds to the stigma. McDonald's is one of the places that people can go into, and like I said, it's a judgment-free zone. It's a place where you can walk into, and a person who's having a rough life can kind of walk into the back door, open up, grab a newspaper out of the garbage can, and sit at the table and use 99 cents to buy a coffee and sit there for 4 hours and rejoin society.
Yeah. Christopher Zender, you could maybe mention another place that features in Chris Arnade's book, storefront churches. You've probably seen them in Ohio.
Well, in rural Ohio, actually, you don't see a lot of storefront churches. You still see a lot of churches, and that's basically probably because there hasn't been a lot of building onto these little towns. So in our little town of 400, we have 3 churches.
Oh.
Yeah, none of them Catholic, but...
Do you have a round one where the devil can't get in a corner?
No, we don't have one of those.
Oh, darn.
But storefront churches, I think it's interesting. I once knew a storefront church in Bakersfield, California, that was actually Eastern Orthodox. It was the only time like that. Yeah, but storefront churches are interesting because I know California, I remember them. And maybe you could, Mr. Arnade, you could speak about what makes them vital to people. Are there not enough regular churches, so freestanding church building, denominational churches in these areas?
I think it's a bit like the MacDonald's phenomenon, where I think in a lot of these rougher communities, they're kind of like, they're places that have started up and taken, literally. I remember a literal storefront, one that had taken over Kentucky Fried Chicken, a failed Kentucky Fried Chicken.
But you don't call that chicken fried. You don't call it fried anymore, do you?
That had taken over a Pentecostal church, had become a Pentecostal church, and that was all across the places. One of the themes of the book is faith, one of the chapters, and it's one of the, I found myself in churches a lot and McDonald's a lot for the same reason, because they're the places that worked. They're the places that were in these communities that, offered a respite from the street, and that includes storefront churches, which were, places that felt, again, a bit like McDonald's, is that they, you didn't have to have a resume to come inside, and you weren't necessarily judged about your past behavior. you were expected and hoped that you would reform yourself and try to find a different light and go forward in a different way, but there was a lot of acknowledgement of your past failures as being things that were, could be forgiven and look beyond. And I think that, at a deep philosophical, at a deep psychological and philosophical level, they offer a lot to a community that hasn't been offered a lot, And in contrast, again, to the government nonprofits, the government agencies, the Social Security office, all these, the detox centers that offer up only bureaucracy, rules, and linoleum floors, these places have an aesthetic appeal of being warm and open and welcoming. And I think, that's a huge difference, and it's a huge positive to people who don't have a lot in their life, that a lot of people in their life who welcome them in such open arms. I did go, as a Catholic, I did go to larger, more conventional services, but and that the amount of energy and warmth that I found in the storefront churches was in aggregate higher, with the notable exception of the Catholic churches and immigrant communities, especially places like El Paso and the Texas Mexican border, and places like Bakersfield, where I think there's a large Mexican American population that where the Catholic churches felt very much alive.
And the pews don't have pads on them either, do they?
No, they don't.
Now there's a real life and death struggle going on when I read your book at the storefront churches in challenging the addiction. Could you say something about that, about people whose experience at the storefronts has led them to kick it, at least for a good stretch? And could you say something about just why addiction is so widespread?
Yeah, I'm one of the few. I'm a bit on the controversial side in my views of addiction. I view it as being not about supply, but about demand. There's a deep demand because people have this big absence, this big hole in their soul. And, at a core, a lot of these towns have lost so much. They lost the factory that gave the town the stability gave people the stability to walk right out of high school, get a job, that gave them the stability to marry their high school sweetheart, to build a family, and watch their children do the same thing, and their grandchildren do the same thing, and fill up the churches and the congregations with them and their children. And when these towns went on this downward slope, when they lost those jobs, everything fell apart. The homes fell apart. The churches often fell apart, although they did a lot better job of holding up. What mostly left though was hope, this sense of optimism, the sense that you might have been on a ladder that didn't have many rungs, but at least you were climbing, and you felt like your life had meaning, and most importantly, you felt like you were a valued member of something larger than yourself, your community, your congregation. And when that all fell apart, drugs came into the scene. A lot of people felt a need to kind of both numb the emotional pain, but also one of the things that I think is a dirty secret that people don't like to admit that using drugs is a very communal activity. The drug houses I went into, the drug traps, as I call them, the crack houses, are very communal and very accepting. They, again, don't ask for a resume. All you have to do is come in and use the drugs. But they're also a community of people who understand your pain. They might understand, what you've gone through, what your parents have gone through at a personal level. So there's unfortunately, a great appeal to drugs that has a lot of people have found have taken comfort in, and I think what has one of the depressing things about my book is very few people, over the 8 years that I did this work, very few people made it to recovery, made it out of the drug. A lot of people died. A lot of people ended up in jail. But those who did make it out, those who generally found their way through the storefront churches or through faith. And so the book for me at a personal level was a very important recognition of the power of faith.
Mario, there's something else, and it's connected with addiction that Chris's book presents us. You want to go ahead with that?
Well, one of the things that I see in the narrative is that people, by looking at to feel this emptiness in their hearts, they're looking for love, mercy. And to me, sounds as if that is proof, if you will, of our condition of people who are person because we are related to other people in a community, and when we are recognized. And our society at large, precisely, very often is the opposite, with its emphasis on self-interest and individualism and everything in between. So here, I think there is a proof that we are made for something else, something greater than ourselves. So, in my point, also my question is, you explained there that there is a role played by the churches, but still there is no only by Christian churches. You also describe someone who is changed his life by meeting people from Islam. Could you elaborate a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think one of the things that MacDonald's highlights to me is when you think about it, MacDonald's is formed about a very quick transaction. It's entirely about getting in and getting out quickly. That's the whole idea behind MacDonald's. That's the way it's designed. And yet, in MacDonald's, designed for this, people form communities. So it just, to me, it speaks, that fact, that reality speaks to how important community is to people, and how when we build a society built on individualism the way we have, it's not necessarily what people want. People want community so badly they're forming it in McDonald's, and I think that needs to be. I think people have missed how important community is to people, and I think when we miss how important community is to people, I think that we miss so much, and I think that explains a lot of why churches also are so important to people, because they are communities, and they do feel they are about being having a meaningful role in something larger than yourself. But it's not just the pragmatic that I want to emphasize in my book. What I try to get at is, I myself went through, I mentioned my story a little bit because when I started this project, I was an atheist. And so, I don't want to just do the usual, religion serves this role because it's pragmatically important, but it's much deeper than that. I think I was a wealthy banker for 20 years before doing this, and one of the things I think when your life is so successful, it's easy to miss the evidence for why faith is so valuable, is so important or true, because to me at least, what I saw and I learned from this was how everybody, the humble, how being a human being is about being humble and recognizing that life is very much, there are things out there that are much larger and much more complex than we can figure out. And I think when you're a homeless person, the evidence for that is much more obvious. You can kind of lose the evidence for faith, lose the evidence for the reality of faith when you're successful, because it doesn't feel like you need faith to, or as an explanation for anything. It's your own hubris that's the explanation.
Let me stir the pot here a little bit. There's a community of sorts. I think of community as a focus for analogies. So a community of sort in the drug traps, no doubt. We often hear about sharing needles and that sort of thing. And there's a ersatz community, I guess, in prostitution. And there's certainly a link between addiction and prostitution. And the prostitutes that you interview don't call them sex workers, don't call themselves sex workers, but you refer to that as sex work. What's going on there? I mean, it seems to me that prostitution itself is a continuation of abuse, oftentimes initiated by abuse within the family, but that's a continuation of abuse. And if we really wanted to talk about sex workers, I suppose it would make sense to talk about unionizing them, but that doesn't seem to make any sense at all to me. Thoughts on that?
Yeah, I tried to steer clear of too many things like that in my book. I wanted to make let the words of the people I interview speak, and so that's why, I let when they say prostitute, I use the word prostitute. When they say more demeaning words, I use more demeaning words. Whatever term they use, I put in. It was a choice of my publisher to use sex workers.
That's very, very interesting.
I mean, I agreed to it. I agreed to it because I felt like at the time that there was no need to create a controversy and stick and have people who I wanted to read my book not read my book because of the wrong words.
But so the publisher goes into the controversy, but takes a position on the controversy.
It was as much my fault as anything, or my decision as much of anything, because I did want to avoid the controversy. But I feel like, in general, what I try to do is, let the, I got jumped on. I got jumped on a long time ago for using the word prostitutes, even though the people I talk to use the word prostitution. So.
Yeah. Though in an academic context, it's mandatory that you refer to sex workers. I have this image of someone in an academic context who says something like, my brother finally made good. He became a sex worker. I have this thought, no, nobody even in academia is going to say such a dumbass thing as that. However, I just wanted to raise that issue. Christopher Zender, what next?
Well, a question. I like to go with definitions an awful lot. What
are you, a philosopher?
No, I'm a hack journalist. Remember?
No, you're not.
Anyway, I used to be. But anyhow, in the beginning of the conversation, you, Mr. Arnade, you said that you liked the summary that your book is about accompanying those who have been left behind and listening to them. What does it mean to accompany these people? And how, and maybe on the level of individuals, perhaps the first place to start, but on other levels as well, and even maybe on the state level.
Yeah, I mean, from a logistical standpoint, the first part of the project was 3.5 years of literally, spending half the day with people each day, and so accompanying meant going into the, taking them to detox, crawling with them under bridges, helping them shoot up, helping them move into new homes. Taking them, visiting them when they ended up in jail. In one case, driving a young woman across country to visit to go back to live with her mother. But at a philosophical level, you can never really, there's always going to be a gap between. I always went home to my home at night. There's always going to be a gap between what I see and how I describe their lives and how they feel. And one can only really, the best way to have them speak in their own words, and I try to do that. But I think, one of the things that happened to me, it took a long time for me to go into a point where I ended up getting to understand their worldview. And understanding and stop trying to put my worldview on their worldview, and started seeing things in their framework and trying to see things. But I don't think you can ever really accompany anybody at that level because especially when the gap between me, a successful banker, monetarily successful that is, versus somebody who literally has been living in abandoned homes and under bridges for 30 years. There's just such a large gap there that I don't think you can ever really, cross the divide, but you can do your best to try to.
And you listened. You surely listened.
Right, and one of the things I tried to do as much as possible, in the first draft of the book, I wasn't I physically wasn't in it. I tried to edit my role out of it, but I didn't think that was fair. It made it harder to read, and also I don't think it was fair because I was there, and I am a character in the book, and it's wrong to pretend I wasn't there.
Well, it sounds like your book is almost journalistic in its focus. Do you think? Are these people where they are because of a lack of accompaniment over the decades, really?
I think there's certainly yes. I think in a philosophical sense, certainly. I think a lot of people, almost everybody I've met who's homeless feels abandoned, or has been abandoned, either at a very early age, literally abandoned, or suffered such trauma or has been through so much and was in such a bad situation that they had to abandon the home they were given. There's never, I think, again, going back to the original title, there's never been dignity bestowed on them by the authorities. Every place they've ever turned has kind of stigmatized them. Should it be the foster home agencies? Should it be the welfare office? Should it be the public school system? None of it has really ever offered them, someone who they feel like is accompanying them, and who gets them, who can guide them, who can be both a physical and spiritual mentor. There are people who, to use a cliche, have fallen between the cracks and don't know how to get back into the house.
One place you certainly see that is in juvenile courts and past juvenile courts. In the Inglewood, which is a city that you might like to visit sometime, in the Inglewood Juvenile Court, what you ordinarily see is the judge coming in and speaking earnestly and familiarly with the very few lawyers who are privately hired. And then after that, there's a kind of cattle call for all the other cases. And in many instances, the court-appointed lawyers have have never met their clients. And so the defense, the fair defense, begins with, "Now, are you or are you? And what did you do? What's the story?" And it's really a striking difference there of how those who have some resources are treated, and how those who have no resources are treated.
Yeah, I spent a fair amount of time following the case loads of a few of the people in the book, and that experience is far too common, where the courthouse is just literally the lawyers don't know their clients, and they will call the name out in a crowded room and try to find them 5 seconds before the hearing begins.
Which can be tough because the name is mispronounced.
Yes, exactly. It's depressing all around.
Yeah. Now, here, before we go back to Mario, I gotta maybe just slide this in. You certainly met people who had schizophrenia, but I'm not aware of, I don't recall in your travels and in your listening and all that much about people with schizophrenia or people with allied serious mental problems. And in Los Angeles, and Inglewood is really a pocket within Los Angeles. In Los Angeles, the manifest schizophrenia is just so striking. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I would say that a fair number of the people who are homeless have mental issues, and part of the reason I tried to stay away from that is the whole issue, the journalistic question of can this person ever really know what they're approving. So I take pictures and I give interviews, and I often spend a week or 2 weeks with people. And I don't think people understand what it means to be in a book and what it means to have their picture online, and how and how that can really, for a lot of people, they think it means it's going to better their situation, and that's not necessarily the case. And so in some cases, I don't want to give false hope to people who I think are having trouble making judgments.
Right.
So,
Mario, what else should we be talking about here with Chris?
Well, I heard many times mentioning about dignity, and that the people who are in the back row are the ones who have lost dignity and appreciation, love, and excluded, and so on. But they are abandoned. They feel abandoned, and so. But my question is, if one comes from the front row, wouldn't be then the case that in many instances that person also feels abandoned? In other words, that person lacks meaning, and that person doesn't have a sense of direction in life, and so that person can be also on drugs because of that. And if that may be the case, what would be the difference between those who are in the back row and the front row as to how they view their family or home? Why is it only or more the people in the back row feel more abandoned?
I think it's because, to put it in kind of political terms, I think the front row is the in group now. It's the approved group. It's the sacred group. It's almost like in the United States, at least, the secular elite is the new religion. It's the new faith. And if you want to frame it in the sacred and profane, if you buy into the path, the getting a big resume, going to Harvard, going to Princeton, working in banking or working on Wall Street or in academics, I think it's a fairly, you're in the in group and you set the cultural and political agenda. And so yes, there can be a lot of loneliness in the front row. Yes, there can be a lot of economic failure, a lot of loneliness. But at the end of the day, you still have your resume that makes you kind of a member of the approved class, and you also have a platform to complain. If you do complain. If you're a frustrated adjunct at a smaller college or bigger college, you can write an essay. You know the language and the framework that people in the front row listen to you, so you can write an essay and hopefully get it published in a magazine or a New York Times op-ed and bring attention to your issue. I think the problem with being in the back row is, if you complain, then you're angry, and you're kind of generally seen as kind of being either a racist, you're considered being you're dumb, you're uncouth, you don't know your place, etc. So I think a lot of it's about feeling helpless. And yes, believe me, I'm a big fan of the front row. I got a PhD myself. I love academics. My father was a professor, but life can be very tough in the front row, and it comes with a lot of the same problems that face in the back row. But ultimately, you're on the right ladder. You're on the approved ladder. You may be the lowest rung, but at least you have you can navigate the in group and know the rules, and you're going to be listened to. Perhaps you know how to raise your voice in a way that will get listened to.
Yeah, I know people who say that PhD stands for piled higher and deeper. At any rate, Christopher Zender, what next?
Yeah, we talked about the front row and the back row, and there are other rows in between. And I see, like in rural Ohio, for instance, I see there's a lot of back row. And people, if you come closer you get to Columbus, you see a lot of front row. And the front row keeps pushing in on the back rows. But there's also these rows in the middle, people who are not, as you described them, the people with resumes. They're people who have families and they're working jobs which they feel like don't pay enough. What insights do you have about that? I mean, your experience in traveling, have you talked to those people? And what do you think?
I still think that, it's one of the things that, because of my focus, it was primarily the very back row. But I think I still believe, that the largest division in the United States, or to me the most salient division, the deepest division at a philosophical level, not just at a material level, is how much education you have. So, to me the back row is in aggregate, in the largest term, covers a lot of the middle row in the sense I would say if you went to a smaller state school, a smaller private religious school, you're in the back row. The front row to me is a very narrow category that generally, the majority of people are, quote, in my mind, are back row. The front row is generally a narrow category of people who have postgraduate degrees or went to maybe 15 of the most elite schools. And so I tend to throw the middle row in the back row because I think a lot of the middle class and the middle row tends to share the philosophical values of the back row more than they share the philosophical values of the front row. But yeah, I mean, one of the things I didn't. There's some focus in my book of what I would, people retirees who only have a high school degree, but would probably be considered middle row in the sense of economically at least. Who did well, who had a 40-year job, selling cars or auto insurance or what have you, but don't have much more than 2 years of community college. So I still believe that the middle row exists, but to me it's more of at a philosophical level, is more aligned with the back row than it is the front row.
Though oftentimes the middle rows don't seem to know that.
Sorry?
It seems to me that a lot of times people in the middle rows don't know that.
I think a lot of it's about, I think in some cases it comes down to simply geography, right? Which is, where are you, what is your community? Is your community more front row? Columbus is a perfect example. Columbus is a college town. And Portsmouth isn't. Portsmouth has a small college. It has, as a Swanee State, I think, but it's not a particularly elite college, And I think the front row towns, to me, are the ones that are around kind of a big tech company. Their town is defined by the big tech company or defined by the big university. There are certainly back row members in Bridgeport, but Bridgeport has Yale, and that very much defines Bridgeport in many ways.
Now, there's a difference, right, between how the back row sees home and family and how the front row does.
That's right. One of the things that, kind of defines the front row is kind of, mobility, and they expect mobility out of everybody else. One of the things, their solution, the front row often, especially on the left, the solution that for the back row is to become like them, is to get an education, and so one of the stories I tell in my book, and this is a story that I could have told 55 different versions of, but as a young woman who's in the MacDonald's in East LA, she goes there at night to play her Game Boy, to work on her computer because her parents don't have a phone, don't have enough money to have Wi-Fi. But she's attending East LA Community College, which is fine. But she had said she wanted to go off to New York to go to college. And I asked her why she didn't do that, and she says, "Well, I can't leave my family. I'm my mom's translator." Which is true for a lot of immigrant families. The oldest child serves a role as being bilingual, and helps the parents navigate the new country they're in. So she wasn't. I think there's a lot of people who would look at her decision as the wrong decision. She should have gone off to college had she had the option to go away to a quote better school, but she chose to stay in town, to stay with her parents so that she could help her family. And that story is told multiple times across the time. I could have told 100 different versions of it, of children who have chosen not to go to college or can't go to college because they have an obligation to their parents, or their parents have or they don't want to leave their community.
Mm.
And I think so. Mobility is a big one, and the other one is faith. How faith is viewed. I think again, the front row in aggregate, not every case, but the front row in aggregate, when they see a problem that needs to be solved, their framework of solving problems is about running to the library and getting books, and building a math model. Whereas I think in the back row, it's a lot more experiential. It's a lot more intuitive. It's a lot more running to the Bible, running to their friends to talk it over, running to the priest to consult with them. It's a very different way of thinking about how you solve a problem and how you approach life. So what I say in the book, is it's effectively about valuing what I call non-credential forms of meaning, and places you don't need a resume, things you don't need a resume for, like faith and place and family, things that are free, so to speak, monetarily.
Now, Mario, you've been at home, and it seems to me simultaneously you're at home in Paraguay and Kansas. How does Chris is thinking about home and place. How does that resonate or fail to resonate with you?
Well, I think resonate very, very close to my heart, because when we talk about the front road and elite, secular elite, that is very common in Latin America. And that idea or that tradition comes from the 19th century. And so if you belong to the right family and you marry to the right person in another elite family, then you are the winner. You are a winner. And so you are given all the opportunities that people in the back row, the peasants, the workers, don't get it. And so, and faith, as I think Chris is referring to, is more quote-unquote intellectual. You look for yourself in order to search for, let's say, quote-unquote, the truth. So it's not something that you share with others. It's more individualistic, it's more autonomous, and then you have two countries. The countries which is the country which is guiding the whole nation, and then the rest of the people. And that is what, in some ways, explain the phenomenon in Latin America of populism, or the leaders, populist leader who, on behalf of the people, try to bring them into the front road. With their own means, I would add, but that's explain the phenomenon of populism. So in some ways, they are the link between these people who are completely left behind and the elite. So for me, I think it's a very accurate description of what happened. It's not only, I think, the United States. And one last point, I think. Many of these people in Latin America from the elite are the ones who are today has been studying at Harvard and Yale and Princeton, and getting their degrees and go back home and continue this view of life. So it's, in some ways, it's the global elite.
That's right. I think one of the things that, given my father's history and given my job on Wall Street, I spent 20 years in the global elite. I spent a lot of time in investing in Buenos Aires, a lot of time in investing in Sao Paulo, a lot of time in Moscow, a lot of time in Istanbul, and they're very small groups of people who run the country. And in Buenos Aires, or in Turkey, it's the same group of people as well. They all went to Yale or Harvard. They all fit in very much with living in New York, and so it's this class of people who are as comfortable in a certain neighborhood in Buenos Aires as they're as comfortable as in the neighborhood of Jardine, Sao Paulo, as they are in Upper West Side or of New York City. And they, in many ways, have replaced. They share more of the values. A wealthy person in Jardine, Sao Paulo, has more in common with a wealthy person in Upper West Side than they do with their own countrymen often. And so and the dominant faith, the dominant religion, the dominant thought process amongst the elite, global elite, is this secularism, is this kind of rationalism, this cold rationalism that views kind of increasing the GDP. The two goals is to increase the GDP and to increase efficiency, regardless of what happens to people in their communities and their country.
But somebody from the back row, like your hard to forget friend Takisha, she has a different self-definition, it seems, and part of that self-definition is that she says she's a child of God. What do you take her to be saying there? How does that play out?
I mean, that was one of the Takesha is a character in my book, or a person. I mean, she still calls me periodically. Who, when I first entered Hunts Point, which is again the poorest neighborhood in New York City, which is also 99% Latino and black, and I'm very white. Takesha was the person who first struck me and first kind of helped guide me through the town, through the community. And I had asked her when I was doing this project, I would take people's photos and then ask them for a one-sentence description of themselves, and she shot back very quickly, as who I am, a prostitute, a mother 6, and a child of God. And she has, again, she's someone who made me rethink my views on faith, because here's somebody who life has been working as a prostitute on the streets and using heroin for 30 plus years. And yet, here she was, life had dished out about as brutal a hand as it could possibly have dished out. And here she was, quite religious. And, in her mind, it's just a reminder for herself as much as anybody that she's as valuable, she feels as valuable, she feels as important as anybody else. And in the eyes of God, she is. She may not be in the eyes of the police. She may not be in the eyes of, the courts or the legal system or the educational system, or certainly not by our educated class. But within the eyes of, when she opens up the Bible, which she has many copies of, or she goes to church, in her mind, she's an equal with every other congregant.
And we're certainly all sinners, that's for sure. Let me, as we get close to the end here, say something that connects with coronavirus, which, if people are oftentimes on the abyss, threatens to send them right over. This Sunday in the Los Angeles Times, there's a lead editorial, big editorial, takes up almost a whole page, and it's focusing on, the headline says, brutality of coronavirus triage, assigning a different value to different individuals' lives is immoral. Yes. Now, in the editorial, there's a reference to basic American value, and what is it, quote, all human beings are created equal. And then in the very last mini paragraph, which is supposed to have the punch, right, the business of distancing and the lockdown and so forth, it leads the editorialist to say, the economic and social costs are huge, but we pay them in order to reject the process, and of course the triage issue. We pay them in order to reject the process of assigning a different value to different human beings and to reject the affront to human dignity that such calculations entail. When I read the Times saying this, I think of what the Times says about so many other questions. Certainly I think of the Times' strenuous endorsement of the killing of the preborn, of abortion. And yet here is this claim that we have to avoid an affront to human dignity in the case of every single human being. What's going on, Chris, when it comes to how the elite talks and how the influential thought shapers talk about human dignity and And what maybe Takesha would say is the basis of human dignity, and what maybe you would say is the foundation of that dignity. What's going on there? We might end on a philosophical, theological note.
Yeah, I think this pandemic has exposed a lot, and this idea that we're all in this together is a nice platitude, but the reality is we're not all in this together. It's exposed how much injustice and how much inequality there is in this country. There are some of us who are fortunate, like myself, to be in a large home with a large yard and can easily miss 3 months of work, and there are those who are literally on the streets and can't shelter in place. So I think the virus has exposed a lot of inequality that I think, it's not surprising to me that the elite are going to overlook it and try to spin it in both political parties. I throw both of them under the bus equally.
By the way, Chris, not to interrupt, even though I'm interrupting, there's another party, not libertarians, not Greens. Your hosts today are affiliated with the American Solidarity Party.
Okay, that's the two major parties. How's that?
Yes. Well, anyway, we hope that sometime you come on the show again and tell us about what you were looking for. You maybe find hints of in the American Solidarity Party. I had to interrupt before we came to the end of the hour, but keep going, please.
I've ran across the party before in the past in good ways, and so I think. One of the things that's frustrating to me is how politically the front row, the elite, use kind of platitudes about togetherness and diversity to kind of smooth over the injustices that occur. And this is a perfect example of that. No, we're not all in this together. Are alone together. We're very divided. And those divisions are being exposed, and one of the editorial that every life is equal is a bit shocking when the evidence is so obvious that what's happening right now is every life is not valued equally. I mean, the meritocracy by definition by its very existence has said it's going to sort people by education. That's just we have this neoliberal agenda that has put the market in everything and says the market's going to be the deciding factor of who succeeds and who doesn't succeed, and the market is what is a determinant of truth, and the market. It's not a hard step to go from the market is a determinant of what is fair and right and truth to the market is determinant how much someone's life is worth. It's brutal when you let the marketplace determine your ethics. Your ethics are going to end up basically, is going to end up deciding that some people don't deserve to be alive.
Well, we always end, Chris, with the gospel of the day, and this is Wednesday of the third week after Easter, and the gospel is from the Gospel of John. Jesus said to the crowds, "I am the bread of life. Whoever comes to me will never hunger, and whoever believes in me will never thirst. But I told you that although you have seen me, you do not believe. Everything that the Father gives me will come to me, and I will not reject anyone who comes to me, because I came down from heaven not to do my own will, but the will of the one who sent me. And this is the will of the one who sent me, that I should not lose anything of what he gave me, but that I should raise it on the last day. For this is the will of my Father, that everyone who sees the Son and believes in him may have eternal life, and I shall raise him on the last day. Come, Lord Jesus, come. Chris, we thank you so very much for joining us, and I know you are stuck somewhat with the lockdown, so don't be surprised if I don't come, if Mario doesn't come knocking on your door, because we'd love to explore the American Solidarity Party from the perspective of your travels. So thank you very much, and what happens, and Mario and Chris Zender know this, our producer, Sebastian Mahfoud, who is a peripatetic among peripatetics, clips stuff from the beginning of the program and the end of the program to make it all fit. So thanks to everyone. Godspeed.
And thank you very much. And am I to understand, were you supposed to have a convention this summer in Chicago?
Well, we might be going virtual.
But am I to understand there was going to be a convention?
Yes.
Okay, then certainly I've interacted with your party before. Because
right.
Okay. Maybe one of you or somebody else invited me to speak at the convention. So.
Aha. Well,
good. Yeah.
You can speak virtually. We know that.
But.
So
right. Yeah, you have my email. If you send me information, I would love to look at it more detailed.
Great.
Okay, good.
All right?
Okay. Thank you, Chris.
Thank you guys so much.
You're very welcome. Thank you. Goodbye.
Bye-bye.
Hi, everybody. This is Al Belowski, host of Catholic Mysticism and All Things Catholic. We have such a beautiful, vibrant faith, and I want to introduce you to it. And what we do on the show is we talk about the supernatural. We talk about a prayer life. We talk about the battle that's waged between good and evil. We talk about Satan, and we talk about God and the battle that they have begun for our souls. And we talk about our brothers and sisters, the saints. And we want to get you into this wonderful supernatural aspect of our faith, where we talk about miracles of the Eucharist, where we talk about Our Lady's apparitions at Fatima and Lourdes. And we can let our souls be nourished with this and continue to grow closer to our Lord in holiness. And by our brothers and sisters that have gone before us, the saints, that we tap into their lives and talk about them and the challenges that are so relevant today in our world as it was for them. And we use this to become closer and closer to our Lord, because we are spiritual beings, and He has given us this great gift of His church to nourish us with His sacraments, especially in the Eucharist and confession and confirmation and all the beautiful things of our faith that lead us closer and closer to Him. So I hope you'll tune in for Catholic Mysticism, where we will try, you and I, together, to grow closer through the Holy Spirit to our Lord Jesus Christ. God bless.
We hope you enjoyed the program and will join us back for another show on WCAT Radio. This is Sebastian Mahfoud. Good day.